Let's now actually turn our attention to the slider. Now, in order to see this a little bit better, I will just take this visual element. I just had set some color here, and now it is visible, only that the text is not super visible because it has a rather dark color. But we will solve this in a second. Now, the first thing that you might notice with our slider here, for the first time, what we have is that we get this option to expand the slider, and we can find other elements beneath the slider. So you can see the slider itself, this top level visual element here, is sort of just a organizing structure for what the slider is actually made of. And you can see the slider is made of a label. This is just as you would expect it, some text on the left hand side here, and then of a visual element that itself has a couple of more elements. And so we can see a slider is actually quite a complicated thing because it's comprised of basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other visual elements that actually make it up. And you can see those elements are, for instance, having their own IDs so that you can clearly identify what is the dragging element, what is the border. The tracker is just this horizontal line here, sort of your from your minimal to your maximal value. And you have, again, some organizing structure, which is this this container. And now one thing that you might notice is those things are kind of grayed out. So we cannot just select this label, for instance, and change its color or something like that because it's grayed out. It's not meant to be edited. However, this does not mean that you cannot change the appearance of this label. You cannot just not change it through the inspector in here, because that's sort of the idea of those controls, of those more complex controls, that they are that you get them basically in the way that that they are, and they are just thrown into your UXML here, as you can see when we check the code that this actually gets. We don't get all of those particular elements here. We only get one big slider element that is sort of just an instruction for our UXML. Okay, you get your slider, and later you have to check what this is actually made of and put those things into your final result. For now, in UI Builder, you only get the general kind of instruction that you will use a slider. And so this might be slightly confusing because you have this slider element kind of here, and you can see its actual internal hierarchy, sort of, but you cannot edit it. And now the reason why this is actually happening is that this real internal hierarchy of this slider is actually being created once you, for example, in our game view, once we actually add this thing and once we actually start rendering this thing. And the thing that you can see here is sort of just a simplified version, sort of some recipe that we are currently now working on, where it has not actually created this internal hierarchy of the slider. Now, the reason you can see that is that sort of UI Builder is simulating this just for you so that you can actually see those elements, but you cannot edit them, because in order for you to edit them, you would actually have to represent them here in your UXML, but you're not doing this. You're just kind of having a sort of placeholder with this slider element that will then later, once you add this to your actual game, say, okay, I have a slider, I now have to check how am I creating a real slider, and this will happen then once you actually attach this to a real game view, for example. Now, this might sound complicated, but it's not really. Let's not hang up on this, how this actually works. Let's just see what we can actually do with those things, and you will see that it's not kind of disturbing us a lot in our actual work, and we can still do a lot with the slider. It's just the things that you can do with it are the things that are basically exposed for you. But those are mostly all the things that you would actually need. Now, and it will be also much clearer once we make our own template where we basically do something similar than what this slider is doing here, where we also have our internal hierarchy, and then you will probably understand this a little bit better. Now, for now, let's just look again at what the inspector is actually telling us about the slider here. And now we can see we get a lot more options here than we had with the button or the text before. We obviously have our label. This is just the text. Now we can just probably be a good idea to actually make this visible. Now you can see this is just the text that appears next to the label. But then you have things like a value, a low value, a high value, and stuff like that. And this is actually, again, the sort of functionality that is exposed to you and is actually telling you how to basically use this control. And so what would we expect from a slider? Obviously, we would want to have a range, and this is how you basically set the range. Your range is what you have between your low and your high value, in this case from 0 to 100. And then you have a current value. In this case, it's 42. Now, when we change this to, let's say, 10, again, having this bug where I can only type one character, now we can see we go to the kind of proportionally 10% of our whole range. And now we can see what you have here is a sort of hybrid between something that is just purely for visuals and that is already touching your scripting stuff, because normally in other UI tools, frameworks, and other technologies, you would often expect to have something like this just set by script. But here you can actually define those things already in UI Builder, so your designers could actually decide what values are needed here, if they know, obviously. Or if you're just doing this on your own, you can already predefine here what values you would actually need. But obviously all those things are also accessible by script, as we will see later. Now we are having a couple of more options here, like we can show a input field where we could actually also type in the current value. I think I've never used that, but that would make sense for how to use this. Then we can change the direction, and those are basically the things that are exposed for us. So now we have this slider, and one thing that you might say is, okay, it's not the most beautiful slider, right? It's like a slider from, I don't know, Windows 2000 in those normal GUI apps that you had back then. It's not exactly very great for a game where you want to have some immersion. So probably that's not exactly the slider that you would like to use. But now when we go on to the slider itself, and let's say we want to, we want to set a different background, you can see the only thing that we can actually manipulate is this organizing visual element that is kind of the parent of all the other stuff in the slider. And obviously like that's obviously not enough to actually get some nice view for our slider, so there must be some other way.